Can you see my video screen? No. So I need to share and go here. Are we good? Okay. All right. So I'm going to get going now. Well, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us to our webinar topic this morning of overstressed overassessed and overstressed, leveraging eye tracking and AI technology to save teachers time. I'm Melissa Lazaro. I'm with LexFloor, and co-speaking with me today is Janet Pedrazi. Janet, I thought it'd be a good idea if maybe we just introduce ourselves really quick. And I also wanted to let the audience know that we will have a slide at the very end of this presentation that will give you contact information to Shelly Morris, who is your sales rep there in Texas, and can give you a live demo, answer any questions that you might have about LexFloor, which is the AI and eye tracking assessment that we're going to be talking about today. So Janet, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great. And we'll keep moving forward.
Sure. Hi, I'm Janet Pedrazi with LexFloor, and I'm thrilled to be here today to talk on a topic that I feel quite passionately about. I've been a classroom teacher for about 25 years now. I spent 22 of them teaching beginning reading in kindergarten, and I am currently a reading intervention teacher for middle school students, specifically those who need those foundational skills. And I'm currently a doctoral student at St. Peter's University with a dissertation focus in the science of reading.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Janet. Just a few words about me. I did teach for 15 years at the university, and during my time in teaching, we learned that my son had dyslexia and dysgraphia. And the reason why I'm so passionate about what we do at LexFloor is because my son was assessed with typical district assessments that are administered every single year, multiple times a year, and yet no one flagged him for dyslexia. And as we all know in the dyslexia space, the earlier we can identify a student as a struggling reader who needs the proper intervention and support, the better. And so today, what we're going to go through is a brief roadmap of the state of assessments. It's a tough balance, right? Assessments are necessary in identifying struggling readers and monitoring progress, but teachers and students agree that we're just being over assessed, and that time could be better used in the classroom in instruction. What teachers love doing is teaching kids how to read and teaching kids how to learn, and just having fun in the classroom. And so we know it's a tough balance though, because districts need the data, schools need the data. And frankly, teachers need the data, but they need data that they can take action on. We'll take a quick look at the impact on students and teachers and administrators, what a typical assessment burden might look like for a teacher and what that output looks like. And then we'll look at the question of, but after all this data, do we know if the child can read? And so Janet's going to walk us through a couple of examples of a typical assessment versus LexFloor, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into what LexFloor can provide for you as a teacher, you as an administrator of a school or district, how you can benefit from gaining the unique audio and visual recordings as well as the data points that LexFloor provides. So, it's if we could talk about that, it's a tough balance. It's like I did just kind of briefly touch on that, but how do we get data without these lengthy mandated assessments? And I think LexFloor provides a solution for that, and we're going to look at that a little bit later today. Before doing that, though, Janet's just going to share with us kind of the current state. I'm sure you're feeling it too, about the impact of assessment on students, teachers, and administrators right now.
So we can take a quick look at how the assessments are impacting our students and our teachers and our administrators across our country. the number one factor is that time away from that crucial instruction, specifically that instruction that can be tailored to meet the needs of all students, but specifically our struggling readers who need that tailored instruction. There's also an effect on these secondary students coming into middle school and high school, and they are lacking those foundational reading skills. But now they are presented with these assessments that are assessing all of these critical thinking skills and comprehension skills, but yet they're missing those foundational skills needed to become fluent readers to get to that comprehension level. So it's been a problem, and it's a problem that I've been focusing on specifically in my teaching now. Then there are trainings for teachers, and there are states that now have a mandate for dyslexia training. However, some of these are boxes that are just checked, and they are often video presentations that then teachers have to answer questions about afterwards, and there's no practical piece to that. There's no practice and feedback. So that's a crucial component there as well. And then here is the issue that I struggle with immensely as a teacher and a practitioner, is that all of these assessments that are mandated and that students are enduring and teachers are administering, taking away from instruction, they still do not provide the actionable data that I need to tailor the instruction for our students. So the question is, how can teachers break through this? How do we get past these burdens?
Right. And it's the issue is that the current assessments, I think I said this a minute ago, but they're taking too much time, especially for our youngest students. They're in a computer lab for 45 minutes. It really is an assessment then of stamina versus their actual reading skills. And for our kids that are impacted by ADHD, are we assessing reading, or are we assessing their ability to pay attention and sit in their seat and answer questions over a long period of time? Because of the lengthier assessments, it's less time for instruction. And so our struggling readers could really benefit from 45 minutes of intensive instruction versus 45 minutes of assessment, which gets us back to how do we get the data that we need to drive action for instruction in a shorter period of time. And I really do feel like, to your point, Janet, when you were talking about that burden, that balance and trying to find that is so hard. And yet there is a solution to get the data that we need, and yet have it be in a short period of time. A lot of the assessments that are out there, even the pencil and paper ones that are really looking at foundational skills, it requires a lot of skill to be able to do that assessment. And I know administrators have told me that they feel uneasy about the fact that, one teacher who has a lot more training and skill in being able to do the assessment, those students might get more accurate results than a colleague that hasn't had as much training into how to do that assessment. And so with the administrator wanting to get accurate data that doesn't have any sort of conscious or unconscious bias that plays in there, it's really important that we have a data-driven solution that is unbiased in quickly identifying those struggling readers. I know you're going to touch on this in just a moment, Janet, but a lot of the reports that come out of traditional assessments, it's just so much, right? And yet, we're still wondering, as they did with my child, can they even read? I can tell you as a parent, they can't. The teacher, when they sit with the child, can tell that they can't read. And yet some of these assessments are saying that they're able to do things that they don't know how to do simply because the child guessed or knew how to work the system. Which leads us to the typical assessment burden. I mean, Janet, as a teacher, this too well of what is placed on you and your school and the district every year of the amount of assessments that you have to do. Could you just kind of walk us through that real quickly?
Sure. This gives us a little snapshot into how many assessments that students need to endure and how much time is being taken away from that instructional time. And I do touch base with a lot of colleagues from all different districts in my state and in states across the country, and we're all feeling the same burden. Sometimes with these mandated assessments, then the next step are these mandated curriculums they come with assessments. So you might have assessments for the units in your language arts component and math units or chapter tests. Then there are the district benchmark tests. The district might have this mandate for a benchmark assessment for reporting, and that usually happens about 3 times a year. There are also these beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year assessments that are usually mandated by departments, such as the math department or the language arts department. And they are to determine how much learning has taken place over the course of the school year. So this begins in the beginning of the year with the BOI, and the students are presented with a lengthy test that is testing them on all of the content that they're going to learn. So they typically come out scoring in about 35%. This is devastating at times, and it really affects how we launch our school year. To see students having to endure this test, and I've seen tears and breakdowns. And this happens at the beginning of the year when we're establishing a rapport with our students that's crucial for learning. And this is the first snapshot of school for them. So it can be devastating, and it's a tough way to start off the year. And then we have the standardized literacy tests. They happen typically 3 times a year. We also have the SGOs. Some districts I know have the SGOs, are these student growth objectives that are used to evaluate the teachers. And some districts implement a separate assessment for that. And with that comes the problem of, I saw in my middle school students, some of them saying, well, Ms. Pedrazi, does this count as a grade? Does this count as a grade? And I said, well, no, it's not a grade on your report card. And then they don't try. So, there's that issue. And then with all of these assessments, I still end up with the question of, but can they read? I need to know, can my students read? And going into this, the middle school experience, and the students, it's their first year in our school, I get the assessments from last year, and I'm still asking, but can they read?
Yeah. I mean, I'm even thinking as you're talking and going through this whole list, it's like, and then what about the children that have, or the students that have IEPs and they're going through a triennial assessment? So they're experiencing all of this, just like their general education peers, but then those that are in special education are having further assessments that are being done in terms of measuring success to goals, maybe a triennial review, which is, really extensive. And so all of this time is spent on so much assessment instead of instruction. And I know we're preaching to the choir here. I kind of feel a little bit like, yes, we know. That's why we're in this webinar today, because we are so burdened with so much of this to do, and how do we solve that? And so I think, Janet, what you've put together here and just showing us, are these assessments meaningful, and asking that question is so important for all of us as educators to ask, what is this assessment telling me? Or what is this assessment not telling me? So let's take the next step and take a look at that.
So along with the curriculums often come the curriculum mandated assessments, right? So here's an example of a question that was on a curriculum assessment. It's pick the letter that stands for the beginning sound of Mimi Mouse. And the students had 3 selections, all similar to this, with the picture behind it. So are we truly assessing that letter sound correspondence, or are we asking the students to identify a picture of a mouse? So these assessments took about a 40-minute language arts period, 2 of them, because with younger students, you do it in smaller groups. And I came out with all of this data that truly wasn't useful to me in driving my instruction or in designing instruction to meet needs of students, specifically to meet the needs of the students I could see were struggling.
And so here's a typical snapshot, right, of what you were just talking about was be the output of one of these assessments.
This would be one of those literacy based assessments that are like the district mandates to report on student progress.
So the curriculum assessment that you
right.
were talking about.
So what's unique about this, and it looks, it on paper looks phenomenal when it's presented to an administrator, I'm sure, is that, wow, look at this. This assessment tests on 47 different standards, right?
Right.
But as a teacher who's addressing the needs of the students, the number one question I have is, can the students read? I don't, in the beginning of the school year, need to understand what their performance is on all of these standards. I need to know where I should begin with their instruction. And then what's interesting here is that this assessment, as you can see, there's the list of standards that's cut off, but just to give you an idea, it gives you the list of standards and how the students performed there. But there were 47 standards listed and then 28 questions for this assessment. So it's quite watered down. So that there's a question then of accuracy. Even if I were concerned about all of these standards, how accurate could it be? Typically, if you're assessing certain skills, you're going to ask several questions in that area to learn. But that's not possible with the numbers here, with the 47 versus the 28 questions.
And then what is that? Here's a student snapshot, right? I mean, you get down to the student level, what are you seeing here? So
here is an example of, say, an end of the year results portal for a class of students. And it shows that all of these students are performing above benchmark and they are proficient and moving on to their next level, right? Their next grade level. And the teacher in the next grade level will receive this information about each of these students showing proficiency and meeting benchmark. I did have a student that I was tutoring. I'll call him Sam. And Sam was one of these students that in his class, he performed at this green level and proficient. And his first grade teacher was getting that information that he was proficient. I knew from my experience with working with Sam that he was not, and he was struggling. And with that came, he was stressed and had some signs of anxiety as well when it came to taking assessments. But I was able to utilize the LExplor assessment to give me a better, more accurate view of what Sam's reading abilities were. So
let's go ahead and take a look. Should we take a look at that?
Yeah, so here is an example of the recording of Sam's assessment on LExplor. And what's crucial to keep in mind is that he, on that commercially designed mandated assessment that districts typically use to monitor student growth and learning, he performed proficiently. In this assessment, he is reading the first line of this passage, which is "Mag is a big fat dog." Let's take a look at how we did.
And it looks like I'm having a technical difficulty here, Janet. I'm sorry, I'm pressing play and it doesn't seem to be playing for some reason. So I'm sorry.
So we can take a look at the fixations. Melissa, if you want to explain how the fixations are.
Yeah, so I think a really great thing that you can do too, and we'll have Shelley's information at the end here, but this is a live video. So what the eye tracker does is it's capturing how the brain is processing language. So I'm going to skip through to this next slide, and forgive me, I don't know why all of a sudden we're in presentation mode and the videos aren't playing. But as you can see, it's more illustrated a little bit more clearly here on this page. Is the bubble represents the level of fixation. So how long the student is spending working on that word, processing that word, decoding that word. The line is how our eyes move across the text. And the line also indicates regression. So that regression for a struggling reader would be someone who's going back and trying to re-decode or self-correct, a strategy that obviously is taught. It could also, the regression could also mean for a strong reader, for example, as they get to the end of the passage, you'll see the regression in the LexFloor video that goes back up. And so I think we probably jumped the gun a little bit quickly here, but basically what LexFloor does is it takes those eye movements and it reflects the cognitive process of the brain. And so in LexFloor, not only do you get the traditional data points that you would see on many types of assessments, but you also get the audio and visual recordings of the student reading, just naturally reading. And how we do that is the child or the student will sit in front of a computer screen and will be guided by a teacher, a volunteer, or perhaps an aide through the LexPlor assessment. Everything is automated. It moves quickly through, starting with a RAM test for grades kindergarten through 3rd grade, and above 3rd grade all the way through 12th grade. There are 2 passages that are read. So for those younger students, K through 3, they're doing that RAM test plus 2 passages. For our older students, they're reading 2 passages. The other unique thing about how this is done is that the student will read the passage out loud and then we'll read it silently. And through our use of artificial intelligence, all of the calculations and scoring is done in the background, in the system, instantaneously, which then produces a report that shows at a very high level, district level, what are my students that are performing well? What are my students that are struggling to read? What are my, which ones are my students that aren't reading yet? You can quickly find that out. And within then the individual report, you'll see a comparison of silent versus out loud reading. And so with the eye tracker, what it does is it allows you to see silent reading fluency for the very first time. You'll get data on silent reading fluency as well as see those recordings. And one thing that I didn't point out, Janet, that I probably should have a couple minutes ago was that this is all done in 3 to 5 minutes. So all this talk about over assessing and the time that students are spending doing an assessment, LexFloor comes in about 3 to 5 minutes, can give you actionable data to know, okay, which are my students that need to be challenged more? What are my students that I need to pull in and do some more intensive reading instruction, skill instruction with? The other thing that LexFloor does is it will show you, what are the words that they were spending the longest time on. And as a teacher, you can take a look at that and go, okay, there's some skill gaps here. We could use some intensive lessons in using LexFloor. So, there's a new way of doing things, of looking at forward-looking data and capturing the moment of where the student's at right in that moment in a quick period of time with the data that you need to drive instruction. And what I've seen schools do really effectively in using LexFloor is that they'll use LexFloor as gaining that, that universal screener, find out where everybody's at right at the beginning of the year. And because it is such a short period of time, it doesn't have the emotional and stress impact that those longer assessments do. So it really, really encourages the welcome. Janet, you were talking about earlier about this is your first moment of building rapport with the student, right?
And they often think it's fun. They think it's fun and they want to do it again.
Yeah. So, and actually that's my next slide. So you beat me to it. But yeah, students, they want to do it more. They say, can I do it again? Even struggling readers feel good after they do the LexFloor assessment because it is so short. And the thing that I think is when we talk about, is it an endurance or a reading skill assessment, those students that are impacted by ADHD or might be twice exceptional in having dyslexia, ADHD, we're really looking at their reading skills. We're not looking at how long they can sit in a computer lab and do a typical assessment. So, and the other thing that I think schools have implemented really nicely with using LexFloor is They do that universal screening at the beginning. Those struggling readers or those that are in the bottom percentiles, they then use LexFloor as a progress monitoring tool. So if they're referred to a tier 2 or a tier 3 type of program, they can see, is what we're doing working with these students. LexFloor started off as a dyslexia screener and just identifying the kids that were at greatest risk for dyslexia. And it evolved because of teacher feedback, teachers like yourself, Janet, that said, hey, I'd like to know where everybody's at. I'd like to know where the kids that might be on the border that maybe wouldn't pull up on other assessments. Let's keep an eye on those students as well. So it's fast, it's enjoyable, it's a terrific tool for parent-teacher conferences. I'm sure many of you that are on this webinar today have been in situations where you have to have those delicate conversations with parents and say, your student or your child is struggling to read. And I think that's what's impacting their grades, whether they're in middle school, high school, or even elementary school. And it's a fragile conversation to have. And having a tool like LexFloor, and I'm sure you concur, Janet, it provides a video to show the parent, this is how hard your child is working when they're reading. This is how hard their brain is working when they're reading. They are trying so hard to accomplish the task and to read the text, but it's challenging for them. And LexFloor really makes that clear in those audio and visual recordings. Was there anything else that you wanted to share with us, Janet, about maybe Sam's case or how you've used the LexFloor and data and recordings?
Well, just that, in my experiences now, especially with the burden of all these assessments, as I said earlier, is I'm still coming out scratching my head, but can the student read? And that example of Sam, you could see in that picture with his fixations and his regressions, he never made it across that first line. And that immediately, within 3 to 5 minutes, the question is answered. And, that's where we take action. That's where we can begin to group students and understand what their needs are immediately and which students have an urgent need for some intervention. So it has been just a crucial tool in understanding where my readers are. I've had readers who appear to be very proficient, but they struggled in comprehension, and having that recording of the students reading and their eyes tracking across the text is like a window into a student's brain. Yes, this student is extremely bright and is raising her hand every question and has very well thought out answers and can read words at above grade level, but they're not comprehending and they're not understanding. And then I get a little snapshot of these eyes that are bouncing across the text. It just gives me a better understanding of what her needs are instructionally. So it has been.
That's an interesting point. You talked about the eyes bouncing across, and I think those of you that are on the webinar, because we weren't able to play the video, but I'm sure if you connect with Shelley or take a look online as well, that what you'll see is there's 2 different views within LexFloor too. So you can see that bubble in the line and the regression, the whole processing of that text from a student perspective, but you also can see the eye movement view. And so that allows you to see the left and the right eye as they're moving across the text. And what that does, that particular view within LexFloor, unique to LexFloor, is it allows you to see, is there possibly a tracking issue, like something physically going on with the eye that is causing them to struggle to read? Or perhaps, is it a combination of both? And so LexFloor gives you that lens to quickly see, does the student need an eye referral or an eye doctor referral? Does the student need, if they're in 5th grade and they're reading at a 1st grade level, and we can clearly see that with LexFloor, perhaps they need a psych ed assessment to find out if there's a learning disability or reading disability going on. And so it's, quick way of making those kinds of referral decisions when you're advocating for your students' best interest. So I mean, I think the bottom line is the future is here now. And LexFloor is available. One thing I did not mention is that it is based on 30 years of longitudinal research. We're in 8, maybe 9 countries now, several different languages, and it has been peer-reviewed, tested. We've had all sorts of studies done about this particular technology and the way that we are able to calculate our data. We're in the 6th iteration of our artificial intelligence, which just tells you that we've been around a long time and our data is smarter and smarter every single student that we assess around the world. It's really amazing. I think the silver lining of COVID and what has occurred in the last 18 months is that we as educators are beginning to rethink how we do certain common practices, things that we've done for years, how we've assessed reading for 50, 100 years. And one of the ways that educators around the world are looking at is how can we leverage technology to do the heavy lifting, to release the burden that's on our teachers, our educators, our administrators, and yet help students become more successful readers and make those quick gains in reading well. So we thank you so much for joining us today. I didn't know, Janet, if you have any final last words, but I know it's we're getting close to time and need to wrap up. Janet, any final words?
No, I think we've said it all.
Okay. So we've got a slide here that just kind of goes over that. You can scan this with your scan the QR code and it will go directly to our website. But we will also have an additional slide here that I'll share with you with Shelley's information. She is your Texas contact and would be happy to give you a deeper look into a LexFloor demonstration and maybe talk about how it could be a solution at your school. And if you have any additional questions, please reach out to Shelley. Thank you so much for this opportunity of joining me today. And thank you for all the hard work that you do to enhance the lives of students in your community. Thank you so much. Have a great day.